Chapter 12 Teachings of Death. The morning rush of the office goers has begun. As one comes out of the railway terminus, one can see an ocean of heads all around. Once in every 2 minutes, the crowd comes out and disperses into workplaces where the bread earners spend most of their daytime. A posh, centrally air-conditioned building. On the umpteenth floor, in a soundproof cabin, sits a man brooding over the monitor of his computer, attending his email. There is a strain on his face, as it is not a happy news. His competitor's firm has been awarded the contract. Just then, there is a call from his doctor, who too has a very unpleasant news to break, that his blood sugar and cholesterol level is much above normal, and the biopsy report of his wife shows positive malignancy in the intestinal tumor. Hanging the phone and taking a deep breath, he closes the eyes. A visible sign of fatigue appears on his countenance. To avoid the reality, he lapses back into past, the time when he was a struggling young man, his hands trying to reach the stars. To his shock, he discovers that even at that time, he had been unhappy with his then present. There was discontent with his income. He did not want to obey others. He wanted a company of his own, nay, an empire of his own. He helplessly slides back into the present and is forced into comparison. Apparently, he had fulfilled all the youthful dreams, but now he is more unhappy. Then he used to be anxious about his uncertain future. Presently it appears that he has no future but only anxiety. Anxiety, conflicts and worry are the unavoidable companions of human existence. This anguished existence is due to the fact that human beings are the most complex of the organisms evolved on this planet. The human life is multi-layered, due to which there are conflicts and hence the anguish. We have the physical dimension, at deeper level, the psychic dimension, at a still deeper level, add the intellectual dimension, I, and deeper layers. Each level has its own hungers or needs and desires. Had it been governed only by a single layer, there would be no conflict. For instance, the trees are peaceful because they have only the body with a rudimental semblance of mind. The animals, on the other hand, have a more developed mind and accordingly more restless. Even in the human beings, those who are more identified with the body have lesser conflicts and more peaceful. Anguish, however, increases with greater evolution. The mechanism of conflict is quite simple. The body does not have any discrimination and wants to fulfill its desire in any possible way. The mind, on the other hand, is interested but is afraid of the consequences. For instance, the body is hungry and sees the food in a shop. The instinct forces the body to grab the food and satisfy the hunger, but the mind is afraid of the society or the police. So it wants to adopt such means which is either not offensive to the society or its action remains unknown to the society. The intellect tries to present all the pros and cons of the action. At a still deeper level, viveka, or the discrimination, does not agree with the action at all, as it understands only the right or the wrong action and never the convenient action. Normally, we try to deal with the problems at the level of their existence. If one has the problem of gluttony, one tries to solve it by fasting. If one has some anxiety or worry at the mental level, we try to divert the mind from its cause to some other topic which can involve the mind. We are unaware of the hierarchy in the subtlety of these layers. If we handle the grosser problems from the subtler levels, it becomes quite simple. The first step is to recognize these layers in the human personality. Kathopanishad analyzes the multiple layers of human personality graphically in its analogy of chariot. Atmanam rathinam vidhi shariram rathamevatu buddhim tu sarathim vidhi manah pragrahamevacha indriyani hayanyahu vishayamsteshu gocharan atmendriya manoyuktam bhoktetyatyar manishinaha. Know the Atman as the master within the chariot and the body verily as the chariot. Know the Buddhi as the charioteer and the Manas verily as the reins. The sense organs, they say, are the horses and the roads for them are the sense objects. We call him the Atman, the experiencer, when he is united with the body, senses and mind. The analogy of chariot is one of the oldest in Vedanta. In this, the body has been considered as the chariot and the senses the horses and the sense objects the roads on which the horses run. The rein that controls the senses is the Manas, while the charioteer is the Buddhi, and the Atman or the Self is the master who sits in the chariot enjoying the ride. Unfortunately, we are so identified with the senses and the body that we do not know that there is a controller and the subtlest principle which witnesses the whole play in a non-involved manner. Not only do the senses behave like the wild horses, but even the mind joins them in their misbehavior. All the senses are dragging the chariot in different directions while the mind flutters in confusion. The fundamental teaching of Kathopanishad is to learn the art of moving from the gross to the subtle till one reaches the subtlest Sakshi or the witness principle. The process of achieving this is by being Vijnanavan. First of all, one must understand the hierarchy of subtlety. In an earlier essay, Vijnanam was said to be the reason, and in general, the faculty of understanding. But this Upanishad adds a new dimension to this faculty, Prajnanam or awareness. Vijnanavan is one who has the Prajnanam. Yama explained Nachiketa that Vijnanavan is a person whose senses are under his control as his mind has become pure and quiet. Giving the hierarchy of layers of personality, Yama said, Indriyebhya parahyartha arthebhyascha param manaha manasastu para buddhihi buddheratma mahatparah mahata paramavyaktam vyaktat purushah parah purushanna param kinchit sa kashta sa paragatihi. The sense objects are subtler than their respective senses. Manas is subtler than the objects. Buddhi is subtler than Manas. Mahanatma is subtler than Buddhi. Avyakta or non-manifest is subtler than Mahanatma. Purusha is subtler than Avyakta. There is nothing subtler than the Purusha, who is the ultimate limit and state. In his analogy of chariot, Yama said that the Atman is the experiencer of the body, senses and mind. Any experience is possible only when there is awareness. If there is pain or pleasure, we are aware of the body, senses, and their objects depending on the experience. Taking the cue of awareness, it is possible to transcend the gross and enter subtler dimensions. Yama warned Nachiketa that the transcendence is possible only for those who are capable of seeing the subtle among the gross, sukshma darshibhihi. Yama gave Nachiketa the technique of transcendence through one of the most eloquent verses in spiritual literature. Yached vang manasi prajnah tad yached jnanamatmani jnanamatmani mahati niyached tad yached shanta atmani. Man of prajna merges speech, etc. into manas, manas into jnanatman or enlightened buddhi, jnanatman into mahat or pure activity, which in turn into shanta atman or the peaceful state. Our mind is overcrowded by innumerable thoughts, and each thought has words associated with it and a verbal pattern. Thus, speech is very intimately connected with the thinking process. These thoughts and words have been gathered by our consciousness during its transactions with the world outside, with every sense experience. Each experience, nay, each sense stimulus leaves an impression that conditions the mind. Thus, vak, speech, includes all the senses. In his commentary, Acharya Shankara clarifies, Vagatropa lakshanartha sarvendriyanam. Speech here represents all the senses. We are connected with the outside world through our senses, which bring the external stimuli. The senses thus act as windows, but unless manas, the faculty of mind responsible to gather and sift the sense stimuli, is connected with the senses themselves are ineffective. Our normal experience is that when the mind is involved in some other activity, we are unable to record the sense stimuli. If one is involved in reading an interesting book, even if someone calls his name, he does not hear the call. It is not that the sound is not caught by the ears, but the ear is not connected with manas. The above shloka suggests that if we do not get involved with the senses by refusing to either judge or react, the senses quieten on their own accord. This is what is meant by merging the speech into mind. During the time of contact of the senses with their objects, if there is a judgment, good, bad, etc., or a reaction, infatuation, hatred, etc., then the experience has a conditioning effect. Sage Patanjali and then the Buddha after him advised the seekers to develop the mood of upeksha or indifference, which helps in developing non-involvement. With non-involvement, we get the art of being aware of the behavior of the body, senses, as well as the mind. This awareness has been called as Jnanatman by this Upanishad. Even this non-involved awareness has an effort behind it. If the effort is relaxed, we tend to slide back into the earlier position of involvement. Thus, there is a constant struggle between the will and the nature, and Jnanatman means effortful awareness of doing. Yama the death suggested that this Jnanatman has to be merged into Mahat, which means being. As the entire mental energy gets concentrated, it becomes Viveka or the awareness. And when the Viveka becomes natural and effortless, it merges into Mahat. The beauty of this Upanishad is that it does not stop at this point. It continues and suggests that even this Mahat is to be merged in Shanta Atman. Though Mahat is natural, effortless awareness or being, there is yet this trait of I am aware or I am, which has been called as Asmita. This means that there still is the trace of duality, I and that, of which one is aware. As and when the awareness becomes expansive, nay, all-encompassive, then alone the Mahat merges into the Shantatman, the subtlest and the noblest state of pure being. All this is possible only when one is capable of antarmukhata, internalizing the consciousness. Most of us, however, are incapable of antarmukhata. Yama explained the reason. Paranchikhani vyatrinat swayambhuhu tasmat parang pashyati nantaratman kaschid dhiraha pratyagatmanamaikshat avritta chakshur amrutatvamichan. The self-evident reality made the sense organs, including the mind, with an outgoing disposition. Therefore, man perceives only outward things, but not the inner self. A certain wise man, aspiring immortality, turned his senses inward and realized the inner self. This mantra, which has already been discussed in detail in an earlier essay, describes extrovert nature of the senses and manas. By quietening them, one becomes capable of detaching oneself from external objects and understanding their temporal existence. Everything is subject to change, death and decay, be it the body, sense stimuli, thoughts, emotions, or desire. Death is unavoidable and inevitable destiny of all life. Life is taken for granted because life is, but death is a great problem. We are alive, but since we see death all around us, death is a point of great concern. Although we are alive, our observation tells us, nay, shouts at us, that there will be the time when we will cease to be. To put it differently, present is never a problem, but future is. Only man among all creatures is privileged to be aware of a time when he would cease to exist in future. Animals are neither aware of life nor death. They accept death as naturally as they accept life. Human beings are unique. All their efforts, secular or spiritual, are techniques to avoid or at least postpone death. All their endeavors are to forget or to eliminate this thought of death from the consciousness. A man seeks material wealth with an excuse that he will provide for his children and family, to take care of the emergencies, or even give away the wealth in philanthropy. Actually, all he is only trying to do is to forget the inevitable death which he sees everywhere and all around him. Death is the fundamental problem of religion. If it were not, there would be no necessity for any religion. Due to our involvement with the external objects, we totally forget the existence of the entity which experiences the objects. The aim of every religion is to learn the art of dissociating with the temporal and associating with the eternal. Having learned to witness without any involvement, one begins to see that the witness or the experiencer, knower and the doer remains unchanged while everything else changes. Kathopanishad expresses this thought in the following mantra. Yena rupam rasam gandham shabdan sparshanscha maithunat etenaiva vijanati kimatra parishishyate etadvai tat. Beautiful mantra. that by which man cognizes form, taste, smell, sound, and the sex contact is this alone. What remains here unknown to that? This is verily that of which you have inquired. Yama told about that principle of which Nachiketa had asked. First thing is, whatever we experience is only because there is an unchanging and eternal principle in every being without whom experience is not possible. The moment this principle leaves the body by itself cannot have any experience. Three things are mandatory for an experience: the object, the subject, and the experience. If one becomes aware of the experience of fragrance of a flower, there has to be a flower. The one who perceives the smell and the experience in between. Invariably, our attention goes to the flower and the fragrance and never to the one who perceives the smell, call it the consciousness or the subject. The Upanishadic search for the true subject of all experience revealed the immutable self of man as the true knower behind all the acts of knowing, as the perceiver behind all acts of perception. This is the subject which is ever the subject and never the object. All other subjects are sometimes the subject and sometimes the object, relative to the particular context against which they are viewed. This is the first intimation of the reality given by Yama, that it is the drashta or the experiencer. Yama proceeded to clarify further. Swapnantam jagaritantam chobhau yenapnupashyati mahantam vibhumatmanam matva dhiro na shochati. Ya imam madhvadam veda atmanam jivamantikat ishanam bhuta bhavyasya natato vijugupsate. He who knows this Atman, the enjoyer of honey, that is of fruits of action, the sustainer of life, ever near, and the Lord of the past and the future, accordingly hates no one. This is verily that. Etad vai tat. One of the greatest mysteries is that when we are seeing a dream, there is no doubt about the reality of the dream during the experience. It may be that we may doubt the reality behind the wakeful experience, like the mirage on the sand. No matter how impossible or ridiculous the experience in a dream, we totally believe it. That is, during the dream state, it is invariably true. We remember the traces of dreams in the wakeful state, and we never ever remember the so-called reality of the wakeful state in a dream. Moreover, during the wakeful experience, dream is untrue, and during the dream state, wakeful state is an unreality. But during both dream and wakeful states, the experiencer is true, who cannot possibly be negated. It is this uninvolved witness who has been referred to in the above verse as the Atman. The verse also gives a very valid point that if one goes near the witnesshood and away from the objects, both in dream and wakefulness, one does not grieve, because all objects are subject to constant change, and it is this nature that gives us pain and misery. Another observation made by the Upanishad is that as and when one comes nearer to oneself, drashta, the witness, one also starts seeing the same witness is the Atman existing in all and at all periods of time. The grand consequence of such vision is that hatred gets eliminated, for how can anyone hate one's own self? one of the unquestionable facts of existence is that one sees others in one's own light. One finds the world in one's own image. For a good man, it is not at all possible to find a bad man, and a bad man finds it impossible to find a good one. Yama then continued to give hints from different angles so that Nachiketa could understand the inexpressible, the unknowable, and the infinite principle. The whole message was to turn the attention from the manifest and gross to the unmanifest and subtle, from the multiplicity to totality. The most wonderful thing about it is that whatever is being sought is very much present within each one of us. It is the nearest entity, and it is here as well as there, which means we do not have to abandon our present condition or action. In the whole existence, whatever exists, animate as well as inanimate, is only a manifestation of the reality, like the different reflections of one sun in millions of water bodies on earth. The prime effort of a seeker is to seek this one behind the many. In the following verses, Yama elaborated this idea. Perhaps this group of mantras is not only poetic, it shows the poetic excellence of our rishis, but it takes the reader or the person who is hearing this to a different plane of existence altogether. It says, Agniryathayiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva ekasthatha sarva bhutantaratma rupam rupam pratirupo bahishcha vayuryathayiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva ekasthatha sarva bhutantaratma rupam rupam pratirupo bahishcha Suryo yatha sarva lokasya chakshuhu nalipyate chakshushair pahya doshaihi ekasthatha sarva bhutantaratma nalipyate loka dukkhena bahya eko vashi sarva bhutantaratma ekam rupe bahuda yah karoti tathatmastham yenu pashyanti dhiraha तेषां सुखं शाश्वतं नेतरेषां नित्यो अनित्यानां चेतनानाम् एको बहूनां यः विदधाति कामान् तमात्मस्थं येन पश्यन्ति धीराः तेषां शान्ति शाश्वती नेतरेषाम्. Just as fire, though one, having entered the world, assumes separate forms with respect to different shapes, so is the self inside all beings, though one assumes a form in respect of each shape, and yet it is outside. As air, though one having entered the world, assumes separate forms with respect to different shapes, so is the self inside all beings, though one assumes a form with respect to each shape, and yet it is outside. Just as the sun, which is the eye of the whole world, is not tainted by ocular and external defects, so is the self that is but one in all beings is not tainted by the sorrows of the world, it being transcendental. Eternal peace is for those, and not for others, who are discriminating and who realize in their hearts Him who, being one, the controller and the inner self of all, makes a single form multifarious. Eternal peace is for those, and not for others, who are discriminating and who realize in their hearts Him who, being the eternal among the ephemeral, the consciousness among the conscious, alone dispenses the desired objects to many. These form a group of the most poetic of the mantras in this Upanishad, and perhaps some of the best of those which convey the non-duality of the whole existence. Through various universal entities like fire, air and sun, they try to hint at the oneness. Acharya Shankara, in his introduction to these verses, says, though based on the canons of right knowledge and in spite of constant reiteration, the realization of the truth of the unity of self does not dawn on the minds of those truth seekers whose reason is not straightforward, whose mind is distracted by many false arguments of logicians. Accordingly, the Upanishad, deeply imbued with concern for man, communicates this truth again and again and again. The Upanishadic view of the material universe was based on the organic wholeness. It was not partial or dissective as the modern science. They believed that the principle of fire exists in all beings in the form of body heat, air in their movement, and sun as the power of vision or cognition. Simple-minded that they were more in tune with nature than we are with all our scientific advancement. D.V. Gundappa, a very famous man of letters from Karnataka, points out this enigma of discord in one of his quatrains. Same is the sky overhead and same is the earth we tread. Same is the food we eat and the water we drink. Same is the air we breathe, but how arose this discord in mankind? Mankutimma. The practical outcome of this non-dual view is to drop the puny individuality called I, you, etc. These individuals are only mistaken notions due to which there is bondage, hurdles and pain. When we allow the puny ego to drop into the infinite ocean of reality, all burdens drop. The greatest and the most intense cause of worry is, I am separate. If I am separate, then I have to protect myself from others. If I am separate, then I have to fight with everyone else because they are all my competitors. Life thus becomes a long and arduous struggle, and in such a struggle, worry is inevitable. This separation begets fear of death, because all around we see only death of other individuals. With the view of oneness, we begin to see that though the individual dies, there is no death to existence. Though the individual lamps burn out, there can be no end to fire itself. Though the individual wave disappears, the ocean continues to exist. The feeling of oneness totally eliminates the sin, for the sin is born when one is against the other. We commit sin only when we sacrifice others for our happiness. But when there is only one and no other, how can there be any sin? Why then do we view this world as play of multiplicity? The manifestations like the body, senses, mind, intellect and ego are responsible for the view of multiplicity. They act as the prism which refracts the white light into 7 colors. The pure white light can be seen only when the prism is removed. It is obvious that if we do not have this unified vision, we see the multiplicity and separateness. With the other enter all related feelings like infatuation, jealousy, anger, anxiety and fear. In this powerful principle of non-duality lies the eternal message of love, peace and harmony. If there is no other, there can be no desire. And without the desire, there can be no anger or fear. These thoughts must have crossed the mind of Nachiketa, for he asked a very valid doubt. How can one understand this non-dual reality? Does it shine outside as a reflection or in its own light? The second is perhaps the most obstinate of the doubts that pester even an earnest seeker. Normally, when one starts this spiritual practice, one expects to have some sort of experience like light, sound, or form of the chosen deity. If one gets any one of them, then alone one feels that there is spiritual progress. Our attention is principally governed by the senses and the antakarana, the inner instrument comprising of the facets manas, buddhi, chittam and ahankara, which are all outgoing. Consequently, most of us cannot possibly conceive of any experience that is not external. So we usually seek something external which can be perceived by the senses or mind. Nachiketa's doubt is whether the truth is outside or is it an inner experience, because if it is illumined, then one has to seek it outside oneself. But if it is an inner experience, then one need not go anywhere but die within one's own self. Yama replied this doubt with a poetic mantra. Na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam nema vidyato bhanti kutoyam agnihi tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. There in the Atman, the sun does not shine, nor the moon and the stars, nor do these lightnings illumine there, and much less this domestic fire. When that shines, everything shines after that. By its light, all this manifested universe is lighted. This mantra is chanted at the time of showing light to the deity in the ritualistic worship to remind the worshipper that the physical light is only indicative of that principle which is responsible for all light, but which cannot be illumined by any external light. It says that the ultimate non-dual reality is behind all sense perception or mental cognition, but transcends them, and hence it is beyond their reach. In the very next section, the Upanishad elucidates this important doubt through an analogy of Ashwatha, or the peepal tree. Yama told that the manifested universe is like the Ashwatha tree with its roots on top and the branches at the bottom. This same analogy is used in the Bhagavad Gita. Through this, Yama told Nachiketa the cause of our inability to feel that which is the nearest of the nearest. Like the reflection of a tree in a water body, our vision is topsy-turvy. We see only multiplicity and not the unity. We seek happiness in the objects but are left with only misery. We set goals and work for it, but on finally reaching our set destinations, we discover that our hand and minds are empty. The spirit transcends senses, but the matter does not. Used that we are to condition all our experiences through the prisms of senses and mind, we cannot imagine that there can be any such experience that can be direct without any mediators. Through this verse, the Upanishad is guiding us into the process of going within. External fulfillment of desires and dreams requires efforts, but to realize the unity or totality, the only method is by stopping all action. It is like allowing the water surface to settle for seeing a single reflection of the moon. The more we disturb the water surface, more will be the number of unclear reflections. In other words, only the reality is vibrationless while all other manifestations, ahankara, chittam, buddhi, manas, senses are and the body are vibrations and come under the purview of activity. One has to transcend all activity by merging the grosser activity in subtler activity as already discussed. Yama proceeded to give the technique. Yadidam kincha jagat sarvam prana ejati nisrutam mahadbhayam vajramudyatam ya etad vidura mamrutasthe bhavanti bhayadasyagni tapati bhayat tapati suryah bhayadindrascha vayuscha mrityurdhavati panchama. Whatever exists here in this whole universe springs from and vibrates in prana. It is very fearful, like an upraised thunderbolt. Those who know this become immortal. From the fear of him, the fire burns. From the fear of him, the sun gives heat. And from the fear of him proceeds Indra, the lord of gods, Vayu, air, and Mrityu, death, the fifth, to their respective functions. Almost the same thought is expressed by Taittiriya Upanishad in a mantra. Bhishasmadvatah pavate bhishodeti suryah bhishasmadagnischendrascha mrityurdhavati panchama iti. Out of fear of him the wind blows. Through his fear the sun rises. Scared of him Agni, fire, and Indra and death, the fifth, speed. In the above verses lies one of the great paradoxes in spirituality and probably the greatest of practical hints to the seekers. The paradox is about the two distinct streams of religions of the world. One says, the ancient, including the Judaism, that God is fearful, while the other, including Christianity, says that God is merciful and love itself. Either one of them can be true, but the above verses are really confusing. The Upanishad keep repeating endlessly that God, truth, reality, or whatever one chooses to call the principle is non-different from one's own self. So how can one be afraid of oneself? It has been clarified in the first sentence. Whatever exists in the universe springs from and vibrates in prana. Prana is activity or movement. We know that the whole universe is an eternal and almost restless activity. Modern physics has proven beyond doubt that all matter as such is nothing but a manifestation, vibrating quanta of energy. Reality is said to be nishchalam, achalam, unmoving, nishkriyam, actionless, nivritti, devoid of vibration. A little observation makes us aware of our inability to keep quiet. All the time, even during our sleep, there is a perpetual activity. We know only one occasion when all the activity stops, and that is when someone dies, and no one wants to die. This innate fear of death keeps us under the restless activity. Another observation of the experienced seekers is that whatever the mind or whenever the mind gets into a state of meditation, as the activity of the senses, mind, intellect, as well as the ego is about to stop, there is a feeling of fear. This fear is felt by the ego, which is about to merge into peaceful silence. In a way, it's like the fear of the drop before merging into the ocean, for it will cease to be as a drop, or like the fear of the seed before it germinates, for it will cease to be as a seed. but they can never be content in continuing to remain as drop or seed, for their very existence is to fulfill the possibility of merging with the ocean or becoming a mighty tree. Kathopanishad explains as to how we can complete this journey. Indriyanam pratagbhavam udayastamayo chayat prataguptadyamananam matva dhiro na shochati indriyebhyah param mano manasas sattvam satvadadhi mahanatma mahato vyaktamuttamam avyaktattu param purusho vyapako alinga evacha yam jnatva muchyate jantur amrutatvam cha gacchati. The wise does not grieve, having known that the sense organs which are separately produced and which have their rising and setting are different from the self. Superior to the sense organs is manas. More subtle than manas is buddhi. Subtler than buddhi is mahat, the cosmic mind. More excellent than mahat is avyakta, the undifferentiated nature. Superior even to avyakta is purusha, the self, all-pervading and entirely devoid of any indicative mark, knowing whom every creature is emancipated and attains immortality. According to the Vedanta and science, Prakriti or the primordial nature evolves from the objects of the universe on the one hand and the sense organs of the living beings on the other. The sense organs have the capacity to experience those objects. Therefore, the evolution of these sense organs marks the emergence of a new and significant category in evolution, experience, which introduces a division in the unity of cosmic nature between the subjective and the objective, the experiencer and the experienced. This hazy division becomes more and more pronounced as the evolution advances until in man it becomes self-conscious and discloses its significance as the starting point of a new evolutionary advance from organic to the moral and spiritual levels. Thus, advance is characterized by an increasing recognition by man of his subjecthood and selfhood and the progressive shedding of all non-subject and non-self elements from his self-awareness. The Taittiriya Upanishad analyzes the 5 sheaths, one inside the other. The outermost is the physical, followed by the vital, the psychical, the rational and the blissful in the deeper level. Each preceding sheath is contained by each succeeding subtler sheath from the physical body to the supreme state of Purusha. The above mantras describe the path seeker has to retrace to attain the supreme state. They also give a great hint that all conflict, tension and misery lie only when one is identified with the grosser manifestations. How can one retrace the steps? This is answered by the following verse. न सन्दृशे तिष्ठति रूपम् अस्य च चक्षुषा पश्यति कश्चनैनं हृदा मनीषा मनसाभिक्लृप्तो य एतद्विदुर अमृतस्ते भवन्ति. His form is not within the field of sight. None can see him with the eye. He is revealed in the heart by the manas that is in constant remembrance of the truth under the control of buddhi. Those who know it thus become immortal. God is not a person, but an energy. Energy not even in an ordinary sense. One energy is that whose manifestations can be perceived, which can be called as the objective energy. Another exists in the perceiver, which can be called as the subjective energy. This subjective energy is the one which is called as the truth, Brahman, etc. The above verse negates the effort of seeking it externally while giving a wonderful technique which has been accepted by many enlightened masters, including the Buddha. It is the art of constant remembrance. Explaining this verse, Acharya Shankara writes, how then he is to be seen is being explained. Hrida, by that which is in the heart. Manisha, by the intellect. Manit, being that which as the controller rules the manas, characterized by manana, constant remembrance. Abhikripta, revealed by that intellect which is conscious and is free from the occupation with objects through adequate vision that consists of deliberation. Hridaya, though normally translated as the heart, really means the seat of consciousness in Vedanta. Normally, the prana is utilized for experiencing the external objects as the objective awareness directed towards the external objects. The very same prana has to be converted into subjective awareness, the awareness directed towards the experiencer. This can be achieved through samyak smriti, or constant inner remembrance. Anything can be used for such remembrance. The Buddha recommended what he called as the mindful action, the action with total awareness. He used the act of breathing for such action. Kabir Dasa called such remembrance as surati. A very popular story is repeated in our scriptural literature. In spite of staying with many teachers, a seeker did not succeed in his effort to have any spiritual experience. After a long search, he met another teacher who directed him to King Janaka. The teacher assured him that since, in spite of meeting so many spiritual teachers, he did not gain anything, he might as well try the philosopher king. The seeker was not convinced of Janaka's ability in spiritual matters, and yet he decided to give it a try. It was late evening when the seeker reached the king's palace. To his shock, he found Janaka in the dance hall enjoying wine and the dance of beautiful dancers. With disgust, he wanted to return, but the king said that since it was quite late, it would be better for him to enjoy his hospitality for the night. Tired that he was, the seeker agreed and was shown into a well-furnished and comfortable room. Having dined, he occupied the softest of the beds. As he lay on his back, his eyes saw a very sharp sword hanging just over his head through a flimsy thread. When and if the thread broke, and it appeared to be a certainty, it would kill him instantly. Throughout the night, the seeker tossed and turned, unable to sleep a wink. Next morning, when he met Janaka, he complained about the arrangement and his inability to even rest. Janaka smilingly said, a similar but more dangerous sword hung over his head all the time, 24 hours of the day. The difference was that only he could see it and not others. The sword made him aware all the time, and he never slept. That sword was death. It may be death for some, breath for some others, action for yet others, but there should be a steady and continuous memory and attention on something. It is like the awareness of a lady with a pot of water over her head. Walking, talking with her friends, she never forgets the pot on her head and accordingly acts so that the pot does not fall. When this remembrance becomes natural and effortless, one achieves Sakshi Bhava, the witnesshood. Consequently, one gets released from the binding effect of all actions as the senses, mind, intellect become quiescent. The Upanishad says, Yada panchavatishtante jnanani manasa saha buddhischana vicheshtati tamahu paramam gatim tam yogamiti manyante sthiramindriya dharanam apramattastada bhavati yogo hi prabhavapyayo yada sarve pramuchyante kama yesya radishritaha athamartyomruto bhavati atra brahma samushnute yada sarve prabhidyante hridayasyeha granthayah athamartyomruto bhavati tavadhyanushasanam. When the five senses of knowledge remain steady along with the manas and even buddhi does not act, that is the supreme state, say the sages. The sages consider that as yoga, the steady control of the sense organs. The yogi must then be vigilant, for yoga can be acquired and lost. When all the desires that dwell in the heart are destroyed, then mortal man becomes immortal and attains Brahman here in this very life. When here in this very life, all knots of the heart are rent asunder, then the mortal man becomes immortal. This much alone is the teaching of all Vedanta. All external props are negated in the above verses. The habit of total reliance on the external is very obstinate. It is possible that even a person meditating can be self-complacent with the forms of Krishna, Jesus or Buddha. The yogis on the other hand may expect the evocation of Kundalini. Kathopanishad warns the seekers from this grave mistake. The oft-repeated idea of the Upanishad is, do not get carried away by the experience, but bring the attention on one who experiences. Do not bother about the knowledge, understand the one who knows. Do not be disturbed by emotions, befriend the one who feels. The main teaching of death as given in Kathopanishad is transcendence of the lower or grosser with the help of the higher or subtler. A king made an announcement that he would offer rich gifts to such a person who could give him a formula or a mantra which could be used to ward away all problems and at all times. After a long time, a sannyasin came into his court and gave him a folded piece of paper. But the holy man also added that the formula could be used only once, so it was necessary that the king should use it only when there is a real crisis. The king further folded the piece of paper and kept under the diamond of his signet ring. Whenever he faced a problem, he realized that it was not a crisis. Years passed and the king lay on the deathbed. Minister came to him and said that now there was a real problem because the king was about to die. The king smilingly replied that in all these years after receiving the formula from the sannyasin, he had realized that the problems are only guests who visit us for a short time and then leave. Only that problem could become a crisis which stayed permanently. He had also located the host which never changed and was eternal, and that was his own self. And now even the death was no longer a crisis for him. Moreover, he was not bothered to find out the formula, as there could be no crisis. And the king died happily. The minister, however, was very curious to know the formula, so he removed the piece of paper from under the signet diamond. He opened it and found out that it was empty. All Upanishads declare, through different words and similes and examples, that emptiness of the mind, elimination of all conflict and eradication of misery is the outcome of identification with the host, who has been variously called as truth, ultimate reality, God, or Brahman, which is our own self.